Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Soccer Morning on a Tuesday. Jason Davis with you. As always, it is 10 o'clock on the East Coast, 7 o'clock on the West Coast. It's early. If you are a West Coast listener and you get up and you turn on Soccer Morning at 7 a.m., I respect the hell out of you. That's early. I mean, not that I don't get up before 7. You just don't, your body and your brain, how do you really get engaged? And I come from a family where 4:30 wake-up calls were the norm. My dad and my grandfather were in the military. I didn't get that. I didn't get the genes that passed down. No, it's training. All you military people, thank you very much. I'll say that. I didn't follow my father's footsteps in that. I am not a military guy. I decided to talk on a podcast or vodcast or internet radio show, or whatever we're calling this. America's fastest internet radio show about soccer hosted by a guy wearing a red shirt. That's what this is. This is Soccer Morning. Yeah, it's the fastest. We know it's the fastest. Growing thing. Something. We are here today to talk soccer, as always. We will talk plenty of soccer. There are Premier League games today. The Merseyside Derby is today. I'm decided to settle on that. Liverpool-Everton, exciting stuff. Even if you are not a partisan, even if you don't have a dog in that particular fight, that is one of the games you look forward to every time it comes around on the schedule. It's not Rangers Celtic, it's not Barca Madrid, it's not Galatasaray Fenerbahce. It's not that heated rivalry. And I've seen some stories today. I didn't get a chance to peruse them all. I saw at least one story today, maybe it was the New York Times. It sort of outlined how this is a different kind of rivalry. This is a local rivalry built in most ways on mutual respect. I mean, clearly, look, they want to beat each other. There's no doubt about that. I'm assuming if you live on the blue side of Liverpool, you quote unquote hate the red side, and then vice versa. But I think everything that we get over here, and not being a fan, I'm not as connected as some people, but everything we get over here on the Atlantic, on this side of the Atlantic, indicates that this is a rivalry that's built a lot on respect. You know, the history is Everton started first, and some people didn't agree with whatever, and they went on to the other side, not the other side of town, a couple of blocks away, and started Liverpool. And here we go. 100+ years of history now. And it's especially now with where both of these teams sit in the table, and how Roberto Martinez has maintained all of that momentum that David Moyes created at Everton. And now that we have Liverpool back approaching their old standards after several years of falling down the table. Two teams separated by 1 point right now. So that'll be a 3 o'clock Eastern kickoff here again on the East Coast. 12 noon on the West Coast. So definitely looking forward to that today. I almost forgot there was soccer today. We come out of an FA Cup weekend. Tuesday, you don't really start to think about watching games. But here we go. Plenty of stuff to keep an eye on today. The other games today in the Premier League, just to kind of outline them. Norwich, Newcastle, Man United, Cardiff City, Crystal Palace, Hull, Swansea, Fulham, Southampton, and Arsenal. And then there's games tomorrow as well. On this show, in addition to talking about the Premier League, as we just did, and we'll open up the phone lines and get your thoughts on anything happening around the world of soccer today. Also on this show, Giuseppe La Rocca, our friend from the Tre Quartista podcast, covering Italian soccer and Serie A. He'll join us at the bottom of the hour, 10:30 Eastern time, to talk a little bit about what's going on in Italy. Just off the top of my head, Juve cleans up in the annual awards yesterday. We'll talk about that with Giuseppe, whether or not those mean anything. It's an odd time. Is it just because it's award season everywhere else? It's January and we've got the Grammys just happened. Speaking of the Grammys, no, I'm just kidding. Award season in Italy for Serie A. Mario Balotelli in the news again, hit with a fine, gesturing towards Cagliari fans. What does that mean? Or what does that indicate about Balotelli and his future at Milan? I mean, look, is he just going to always be this guy? I suppose we just sort of have to accept. I love Mario Balotelli. I love the fact he's got a personality. I don't begin to claim to understand him or his condition within that society or how he grew up and everything he's had to process as a Black Italian. Don't begin to understand that. So I can't claim to stand here and judge. I'm not going to stand here in judgment of the guy. But, you can't do things to hurt your team. Also, Eric Tohier, who recently purchased Inter. We'll talk to Giuseppe about him. Giuseppe's on Twitter right now asking MLS fans for their thoughts on Eric Tohier because he also owns DC United, if you're not aware of that. So check out Trequartista _GL on Twitter if you want to interact with Giuseppe on that question. Kyle McCarthy from Fox Soccer, based up in New England. We'll talk to him about the New England Revolution. We can sort of verge off into several MLS topics. Maybe we'll talk to Kyle about the new rule in MLS because it's a Tuesday. There must be a new rule, except it's not. It's kind of a new rule, but it's kind of not. It's kind of a shifting of a step. This is the thing. You can't even put these MLS decisions in the right box anymore. Because it's not necessarily a new rule. And this obviously relates to Maurice Adu and the loan deal he signed with the Philadelphia Union to come over from Stoke City. He makes them a better team. They were obviously looking into getting him for some time now, and there were negotiations ongoing. And the lead up to the Super Draft was Maurice Adu. The story was that the league rejected a contract that would have paid Maurice Adu $1.2 million. Or they rejected the idea of paying Maurice Adu $1.2 million. So they got the deal done. Loan with an option to buy because that's how MLS likes to do their loans. He is a DP. We don't know exactly what his salary will be because that's also MLS. But the issue at hand is whether or not Maurice Adu, as a returning U.S. international, should be subject to the allocation order. Now, typically, those players are. And if you're not at the top of the allocation order and you really want a player, you got to make a trade. And in fact, that's what the Union did. They traded Jeff Park to DC United for the top spot in the allocation order. And Ethan White, by the way. Knowing that this was coming, apparently. So they were prepared for this. But our recent precedent is Clint Dempsey going to the Seattle Sounders outside of the allocation order. And Michael Bradley landing in Toronto outside of the allocation order. Those did not apply in those two cases. Well, why not? Why not? What is the reason? Because they're current U.S. internationals and Maurice Adu is not really currently in a U.S. international, although he's going to be working hard to try to get back in that team. No, they can't be it. Guys who have youth caps have gone through the allocation order. Is it because he's not being paid as much? It doesn't make sense either. Lee Nguyen was subject to the allocation order. How many national team caps does Lee Nguyen have? I honestly don't know. It's a very small number. So what is it? Is it just some nebulous notion of moving the needle? If you are a star on some level beyond Maurice Adu, clearly, then you're not subject to the allocation order. I put it this way yesterday on Twitter. Essentially, it seems that if it's a surprise you're coming back to MLS, then you are not subject to the allocation order. But if it's not a surprise, if it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. He's coming back to MLS to play. Oh, Maurice Adu, okay. Didn't play much at Stoke. Had a couple of loans that didn't really work out. MLS is an opportunity for him to get some playing time. Oh, that's not surprising at all. Then he's subject to the allocation order. But that's not the way it's been laid out. That's not the explanation that's been given, because why would there be an explanation? Why would we need one of those? So Maurice Adu, he is subject to the allocation order. Clint Dempsey, Michael Bradley, not subject. Well, what else is it? And I'll credit Jeremiah O'Shan of SB Nation, who, while I was having this discussion with some people, threw in there, well, it basically comes down to, and again, this is nebulous and this is behind the scenes and fans can't know it, and that's why it's going to frustrate them. It essentially comes down to whether or not you have the juice to pick your own spot. Clint Dempsey got the juice. Michael Bradley got the juice. Maurice Adu, not so much. Maurice Adu's not leaving Europe in a position of strength. He may have had other offers around the continent. I have no doubt that he was in demand in some places. Could have gone back to Turkey. Maybe could have played in a championship level, or maybe there was another Premier League side on the bottom end of the table that would have used Maurice Adu. So he had some leverage, I suppose, but didn't have the juice. What does that mean exactly? Your guess is as good as mine. If the notion is that Michael Bradley and Clint Dempsey can put more butts in the seats and potentially get more people to turn their television onto an MLS game, then that's what we're going with here. Maurice Adu doesn't have that ability. And I don't know, is that fair? Okay. I'm not sure it's completely fair. And it brings up the entire question of the question we've been dealing with for some time now when it comes to MLS, as to whether or not the rules need to be hard and fast, and whether or not the fans need to know them. And I've come down solidly on the side of the league in the sense that if you are growing, if you are trying to improve yourself year to year, you can't lock yourself into some rule. If the rules would have prevented Michael Bradley from arriving or Clint Dempsey from arriving, or signing, back in the day, signing Landon Donovan to a contract that could make him happy and pay him what he is close to what he is worth, or getting Maurice Adu, or any number of acquisitions, you don't want those rules in place because they are going to inhibit the growth of the league. Now, again, I get it from a fan standpoint. By the way, let me actually throw in what the league has put out there about Maurice Adu and this allocation spot. As with most aspects of the business, the league, in consultation with the clubs, reviews the roster rules on an annual basis and reserves the right to modify them prior to each season. The amendment to the assignment mechanism for designated players will be reflected in the 2014 roster rules that will be released prior to the start of the season. So wait, you're telling me that this rule has changed between Michael Bradley's signing and Maurice Adu's signing? How much time is that? A week and a half? And now we're going to see it reflected in the roster rules. All right, fine. Fine. So now you better, if that's the case, and again, I'm okay with the rules being malleable. I'm okay with that. There is but there's also frustration because of the lack of transparency. Because the idea that it's not following any logical path. It's case by case. Now, you have to make a decision for yourself as an MLS fan, whether you will stomach a case-by-case changing of the rules if it means players like Michael Bradley, Clint Dempsey, Maurice Adu come into this league. Stephen Brandt on Twitter, Stephen C. Brandt, would Mix get the same as Dempsey? That's a good question. Look, Mix Diskerud could have been an MLS player not too long ago. Was on the verge of signing with the Portland Timbers. They wanted to sign him. The only way he was going to do it was on a DP contract, and the league said, no, we're not cool with that. So no Mix Diskerud. Now the landscape has changed. And I'd be willing to bet if that situation came around again, it'd be very difficult for MLS to say no to Merritt Paulson. Because now you've got Maurice Adu. He's on a DP contract. And no offense to Maurice Adu, but Mix Diskerud is something of a bigger name. And notably plays a position and is capable of things on the field that are more attractive, that will pull a bigger audience, whether it's in the stands or on TV. Traditionally, DPs have been attacking players. Well, why is that? Because people like goals. Because people like to see the attacking play. Because defense is reactive. Because offense is fun. Ben on Twitter, Ben Deniso. MLS announced that they changed the rule from Dempsey rule, changed the Dempsey rule in 2014. Problem is, why didn't they have the same? Why didn't Bradley have the same? Again, the rules do not buy anything you read in the rules. Do not assume that they are hard and fast and they will not change at a moment's notice tomorrow. Not everybody is going to just swallow that. And I had this thought because Alexi Lawless is on Twitter riling people up as he is wont to do. Talking about the rules, talking about whether or not it's important for the fans to know the rules. And it occurs to me, and I'm not going to say it was better then. But 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, go back in time until the beginning of sport, fans didn't know the rules, the roster rules. We knew the rules on the field. We knew what out of bounds was. We knew what offside was. We knew what a foul was for the most part, although that's changed too. We knew what those rules were. On the field, we knew the rules. This is true for every sport. We didn't know what the roster rules were. You didn't know you didn't know the status of a player. The NASL had rules. So many Americans had to play, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody cared about those rules. I'm not saying that they were broken, but I'm saying that at that point in time, I don't think that there were New York Cosmos fans sitting around working out the budget. And I know there was no salary cap in the old NASL. I'm just saying there's this fascination now with the rules, being pedantic, finding every little nook and cranny in the budgets and the salary cap, and checking on the status of this, knowing how many open international slots there are. How many GA players do we have? Who's going to graduate this year? What's the cap hit for this player and that? Again, not that it's not better now in some sense, but isn't transparency relative on some level? We demand more transparency from MLS, and I am on board with that. This is the modern world. This is the way it works now. This is what people demand now. But only a small percentage, and keep this in mind as well, only a small percentage of the fans really demand to know the rules year to year, month to month, week to week. They're on the internet. They're listening to this show. They're writing for SB Nation. Sorry. It's a small percentage. Do you know what most fans do? Most fans, and I'll even admit to this, and this will shock some of my family if they heard it. I didn't know that my favorite NFL team's roster until the season started. Didn't know it. Had no idea. I mean, I knew the quarterback, duh. I knew a couple of wide receivers. I didn't know who was on the offensive line. I didn't know who our running backs were. I didn't know our linebackers, except for 1 or 2 stars. That was me. And I think that's what most sports fans are like. Your season starts, you go, oh, that's who we got? Oh, I'm excited. Or if you're really, really hardcore, you might pay attention during preseason. We're not talking about that with MLS. We're talking about every single moment of every single day, keeping track of every single rule. 646, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason, it's Raph. Listen, real quick, you want to know what I would tie this into?
What's that?
Fantasy sports.
Okay, what does that mean, Raph?
Meaning, when you see the rise of fantasy, whether it's fantasy football, fantasy baseball, now fantasy Premier League, fantasy MLS.
Yeah, okay.
I think there's such a thing.
I see.
You see a consequent increase in the interest by which, a player can move from, this team to that team so that you can go ahead and put the best team possible. Just a hunch?
No, it's something like that. There's something to that. Again, look, while the fairness minded among us, and you want things to be fair for everybody, but you want it a little bit better for your team. I mean, let's be honest about this. While those people have a hard time stomaching what MLS does from a practical standpoint in a changing soccer environment for a league that for a league that started so far behind the 8 ball and is still working with budgets so much smaller than most of the world they're trying to compete with. I get it. It makes sense to be able to change the rules as the situation dictates. But again, I mean, it does throw into question some of the competitive balance of a league when you have guys moving around outside of what you have established as some sort of rule. I get that.
Yeah.
Anything else, Ralph?
Anyway, that was my take.
All right, no, I get it.
Because, you didn't,
true.
Like you said, you didn't see that back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And now, you have this vast panoply of fantasy sports. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing by any means. I play fantasy sports. But, when you get that level of involvement, there is going to be an inevitable increase in the interest that people take in the various machinations by which the real life teams build their roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up fantasy sports, and there is certainly a school of thought that one of the ways MLS can increase their brand and get more people aware of what's happening in this league is to make their fantasy product, whether it's via the league or someone comes up with a new game and does it independently, but that the fantasy product will drive, and gambling is into this mix as well. I'm going to talk about odds today for MLS, but these things are ancillary drivers of interest in your league. And we know that the NFL is more popular than ever. And that's despite the fact that, there are so many more entertainment options out there for people. When you were talking about 3 channels in 1975 and the NFL got massive ratings, you go, well, what else was there to watch? Now, you've got 1,000 channels and the NFL still kills. And the reason that the NFL still kills is not just about, I care about my team and et cetera, et cetera. It's because there are people gambling on every single game and every single moment. There are people playing fantasy football who are paying attention to the guy on the team that they don't have any connection to. MLS has yet to figure that part out. And maybe they never will. And maybe it's more difficult in soccer. I think that's probably true. It is all part of this. It is all part of the zeitgeist when it comes to the way we consume our sports now. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, man. I'll let you go.
I appreciate it, Raf. Thanks a lot. Haven't given the phone number out. Raf got in anyway. 347-756-6276. A couple minutes until we get to Giuseppe La Rocca from Trequartista podcast and talk some Italian soccer. I didn't really mean to go on a long rant about this, but I think it's one of those things that will continue to crop up in MLS. And how do I say this without sounding like I'm justifying everything the league does? Because that's not the case. There's plenty of ham-fisted actions coming out of MLS HQ in New York. But it makes it more interesting to follow. Let's say it that way. Now, you could argue that if MLS teams had the handcuffs taken off and were able to go into the transfer market on their own outside of MLS influence, and were able to just spend what they had available to them, that it might be as interesting. It might be as interesting. I suppose that's possible. But that also has a knock-on effect in the way that the league is able to operate. Because MLS is not on the same level, the same playing field as most of the world when it comes to money. They're just not. There's not enough revenue coming in for MLS to compete with not just the European leagues of note, but even Scandinavia in some level, and certainly Liga MX. So, in a way, we all understand why MLS operates the way it does. You can bang the drum for the end of single entity all you want. But as I've said before on this show, not in the not too recent past, not too distant past, you take the shackles off, you end single entity, you change the way that the rules work in terms of salary depression, and all you're doing is essentially paying the same players a lot more money, and you're not going to necessarily improve the quality of the league, because you're not going to see a drastic influx of new talent just because you change the way that salaries are controlled. Now, again, MLS needs to improve their salary budgets. Teams need to have more leeway to spend that in order for the league to get better. That's absolutely true. There's no denying that. And see, look, the problem for MLS, while all of that is justifiable, let's have the rules that can be changed as we deem fit because it helps our league grow. We don't want to stop ourselves from bringing in a player or making a decision because we've got some rule that is essentially arbitrary in a lot of ways. But what they're going to deal with is stuff like this. JOGASC, Yoga SC on Twitter. Accept what's thrown at you. I see. Look, MLS clubs are not the fans clubs. Those who support it are pawns. They want you to accept what's thrown at you and not make a fuss. They want robots. I say abort MLS. Okay. Okay. And he's not alone. We know that. We've talked to some people on this show that fall directly into that same category. If you want to go with that, that's fine. I would argue that you probably shouldn't be actively campaigning against MLS because it makes you look crazy. But yay, whatever. If you're going to do that, fine. Put your case out there. Maybe not be a jerk to people. That's where the line is. Maybe not be a jerk to people. But there's certainly room to say that MLS and the way it operates is going to turn people off. It is. It's going to turn people off. I like the soccer. I enjoy the soccer. I am realistic about the place of soccer in this country. Did you see the Harris poll? You probably didn't. There was a Harris poll released very, very recently in which people were asked to name their favorite sport. MLS, soccer, not just MLS, soccer, period, across the board. Whatever it is, club soccer, international soccer, every league in every part of the world. In this country, 3% said soccer was their favorite sport. 3%. NFL was something like 87,000%. It was more like, I don't know, 45%, something like that. Actually, don't remember. It was a big number, and they dominated, clearly. So don't tell me, look, we can all believe that soccer's growing, and it is. It's all in front of us. There's anecdotal evidence everywhere you go. Every time you see a soccer jersey of any team from anywhere in the world out in the wild, that's evidence of soccer's growth. It's still not ubiquitous, but it's growing. But it's never going to be, probably not in my lifetime, and probably not in yours, unless you're 2. And then why are you listening to this show? It's probably never going to be the sport of choice for American sports fans. It's just not going to happen. So knowing that, how do you work within those restrictions? Maintain the league. The most important thing is the league survival. You want to hear me bang a drum myself? That's the one I'll bang. The most important thing is the league survival. Now, maybe you believe they've passed that point and that survival is no longer the major concern. It's fine. It's fine. I'm going to give some benefit of the doubt from that for the time being, knowing how much money was lost, knowing how little interest there was, knowing how few people put in the money necessary to keep a skeleton crew of teams operating long enough to get us to the point where we are now staring down the barrel at a 24-team league. And we have stadiums popping up all over the place. Soccer's growing. That doesn't mean that you can be reckless about it. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, again, did not intend for any of that to happen, but there it is. Love that stuff. When we come back, Giuseppe La Rocca from the Tre Quartista podcast will join us. We'll talk Serie A with our friend. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning, moving now to Italy. Let's talk a little Serie A with our friend Giuseppe La Rocca from the Trequartista podcast. Giuseppe, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Jason. I want to congratulate you on two things just before we start. First, obviously, the funding. Very excited to have Soccer Morning.
Thank you.
Second, the most underrated Oscars commentary on Twitter. Don't listen to the people. It was great. It was great.
You're talking about Grammys, I'm assuming, because I don't think the Oscars have
yeah, Grammys. My bad. It's all. It's award season.
Yeah.
I get them all mixed up right now.
Yeah, you follow me on Twitter, Davis JSN, and you get a little bit of everything. I mean, it's mostly soccer. Let's not lie. It's mostly soccer, which should get you following. But then you're going to get some stuff sprinkled in, and if I start talking about the Broncos, then you'll know it's time to unfollow. Giuseppe joins us.
Don't get me wrong. You have some good soccer tweets, but when it comes to Grammys, you really you turn it up.
I appreciate that. All right, Giuseppe, let's talk some Italian footy, some calcio here. Let's start with Juve, top of the league. Defending champion. 6 points right now over Roma in second place. This is an unstoppable juggernaut. And yesterday they were sort of validated with a bunch of awards. Is there any surprises right now with the way Juve's playing? And is this a foregone conclusion at this point?
Serie A for sure. I think 6 points at this point in the season is actually a lot in Serie A. Just touching on the awards from yesterday, I don't think that's much of a surprise either. I mean, if you looked at Scudetto last season, Juventus ran away with it. They're running away with it this season. Best midfield in Italy, maybe Europe. Chiellini, Barzagli, the defenders, best defenders in Italy. It was pretty unanimous, so there weren't any real surprises. I think in terms of the awards, the only big surprise was Footballer of the Year, which they awarded to Andrea Pirlo instead of Arturo Vidal. You can make arguments for both players. I personally think that Arturo Vidal is maybe the best midfielder in the entire world. But Andrea Pirlo had a great season, had a great 2013, I should say. Has the history, is an Italian player, got the Italian vote,
right.
So he won the award.
Yeah.
In terms of Juve, this past week they actually drew with Lazio at the Stadio Olimpico. This is their first draw, and I want to say 13 matches. And in this draw, I have to say, we learned a lot about Juve, maybe more so than their winning streak. They went down to 10 men early on and went down 1-0 on a penalty kick. Second half, battled back, attacked the whole time with 10 men, and eventually got the 1-1 equalizer by Fernando Llorente. And it shows a lot because a team that is really so far ahead of the field in Serie A, to go down to 10 men, it's easy to give away a game like that. But you saw a relentless effort really in the second half, like they wanted to win. There was still a sense of urgency, and that shows a lot for a team like Juventus.
Yeah, you may just to go back to these awards, for anybody who doesn't know, Gran Gala del Calcio 2012-13. You mentioned Pirlo winning Player of the Year, and certainly Vidal has an argument. Vidal thinks he's the best midfielder in the world. Did he not say that, or was that a bad source that I saw that from?
You know, it's really strange. A lot of people had tweeted that out, and I saw a number of different sources say that, but it's just not really Arturo Vidal to say that.
Sure.
So I'm still hesitant on it. But, he's got a point. He had one hell of a 2013, and I certainly think he's the best midfielder in the world.
Yeah.
He's not maybe the prettiest, he's not a big name yet, and maybe it's because he plays in Serie A and he's Chilean. But I think after the World Cup in 2014, a lot of people will start to recognize this player. He'll turn a lot of heads. And in 2014, I think we'll start to recognize him as the best.
Here's my question about Vidal. His name, as you mentioned, he's not reached kind of superstardom yet, but his name is out there. Is there a chance that someone can pry Arturo Vidal out of Juve?
Look, I think everybody has a price You're hearing crazy bids for Pogba. You've heard them in the past for Vidal. I think after the World Cup, there will be a huge bid for Vidal. He says he's very loyal to Juventus, and I believe it. I think that Juventus have really believed in him, have given him the reins. Andrea Pirlo is the silent leader, but on the field, the warrior is Arturo Vidal. So there is some loyalty component to it. But if there's an astronomical bid from Barcelona, Real Madrid, any of the bigs, I really do think that every club and player has a price.
Absolutely. Again, looking at these awards, it's Juventus. Mario Balotelli as best attacker, Di Natale as best right-sided forward, Cavani as best left side. Let's go to Mario Balotelli, and let's talk a little bit about Milan. Well, let's talk about Balotelli specifically first. Read this morning that he has been fined for a gesture made to Cagliari fans on the weekend. This is the latest in a line of misbehavior by Balotelli. Is it something that in the same way that we talk about Luis Suarez and sort of what you're getting and you better be prepared for when it happens, is this just always going to be a part of Balotelli's game? I know Prandelli came out and defended him and talked about TLC.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. Look, I want to save people a lot of time and energy arguing over this. Balotelli is what he is. He's always going to do these things. He's a guy who wears his emotions on his sleeves. It's apparent, it hasn't really gotten better each season. Mm-hmm. He's just like De Rossi, a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve, like Gattuso, like Totti, famous Italians, right? But the major difference there is that he actually has to deal with racial abuse. Right. I mean, how do you think Gattuso would do dealing with racial abuse on top of already being a hot-headed player on the field, right? It's just that added level of annoyance that really gets him going. So with Balotelli, you got to expect these things to happen. You got to expect his tempers to flare up on the field or to some supporters or anything like that. But I just think that the added racial abuse is really what sets him apart from all the other Italian players that you could compare him to.
Giuseppe, we may have had this discussion before, and I realize it's always going to be there with Balotelli. And while I said at the top of the show, I like him. He's obviously a very talented player. I can't begin to understand his life and what he's been through and what he goes through pretty much daily in Italy. Again, very famous individual and sort of this symbol of something which is way too much on a young player's shoulders. We knew that Manchester City wasn't the right environment based on some of the things that happened there. Is Milan the right environment, and is there a right environment?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I mean, Manchester City, you can argue that it wasn't the right environment, but, he won a title there. He was there for a few years. Same with Inter, won a few titles there. He was there for a few years. I think it's really going to be the same thing with Milan. Yeah, he's going to have his issues. His tempers are going to flare up, and, he might have some altercations, but he'll stay here for a couple of years, maybe win a title, hopefully, and then move on. I think it's, we've seen that pattern time and time again. We see it in Italy with Antonio Cassano, same sort of thing. But I do think that, believe it or not, Balotelli is a little more well-mannered than Cassano is. He'll stick around for Milan for a couple of years, and then he'll move on.
With this latest infraction and the yellow card he received, he's now suspended for the match against Torino on the weekend. And Milan sitting 9th, 4 points back at Torino. I mean, every point counts right now for Milan if they're going to claw their way back up into where they would expect to be normally. Meanwhile, on the other side of Milan is Inter, and we've got Eric Toe here, the Indonesian businessman who owns DC United, has recently purchased a controlling share of Inter. What's the situation? I've seen some issue over squashing a transfer deal. What's the situation and the feeling about Tohir's stewardship of that club?
Yeah, so just to loop everybody in, about a week ago, Juventus and Inter had agreed on a Vucinic-Freddy Guarin swap plus, I believe, 1.5 million euros going to Inter's way. The agreement was there, handshake was made, so to speak, and then at the last minute, Thohir pulls out of the deal, leaves both players basically in limbo. Juventus are upset. All the supporters of both sides are pretty upset. And the thing was, that's really Thohir's first dealing with the Italian mercato, or the transfer window. So a lot of people in Italy have started to question Thohir's actual knowledge of the game, of the players, and don't know if he's going to be a hands-on owner like Moratti was. Mm-hmm. And the fear is that, with Inter, I know DC United, one of the things he's pushing forward with DC United is, the new stadium and, and trying to bring DC United into the new era of MLS. But for Inter, it's not really a matter of a new stadium or anything like that. It's really a matter of getting that club to perform to the level that it has been in the past, to the era of Mourinho. Even before then, when you had Ronaldo, Christian Vieri, these types of players, that club represented something. Mm-hmm. And now what you have at Inter is really a team to walk over. So if the investment is made in the actual club itself, then I think supporters will be a little bit, accepting of Thohir. But right now, they're not really sure what kind of owner he is. They can't figure him out. So that's kind of why I posed that question on Twitter. And I know his tenure at DC United is still fairly new. But people in Italy are still trying to figure him out as an owner. Just wanted to see what the feeling was within the MLS community.
Giuseppe, what's the general feeling of foreign ownership with Italian clubs? I mean, we know that the English kind of view foreign ownership with a skeptical eye. You have to prove yourself, and that that you know what you're doing, and that you're not just in this for the business. And even then, even if you go and win things like the Glazers have done it at United, you're still going to be up to criticism if you run it like a business. Where does Thohir fall in sort of the perception of the Italian fans, and how does foreign ownership on a wider level, how is that viewed in Italy?
This is a very interesting topic, and we discuss it a lot on the podcast. The thing is, foreign ownership in Italy isn't really common. I mean, it's a thing of the last couple of years. If you look at it, the real only foreign owner in Italy right now, besides Thohir, is Pallotta and the Roma Group. The Boston Roma Group. And even that organization had some difficulty at first, but now, a couple years later, we're really starting to see it come around. We're starting to see Roma's brand internationally grow. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see the actual talent on the field improve. You can see it with Roma being in second place and having a surge in the Coppa Italia right now. So it's proven that it can work. The only thing is, it doesn't seem like Thohir has the same sort of approach as Pallotta and Di Benedetto did at Roma, where they want to globally brand Roma, where they want to actually invest on the field. It's been really hesitant on Thohir's part. So that's really the question. Whether or not it can work in Italy, I think Roma are the example. I think they're proving that it can work.
There's a lot to be seen with Eric Thohir and his leadership at Inter. It seems a very different. I mean, look, obviously MLS is a different beast to begin with. It's not on the same level as owning a club like Inter, and then you kind of throw in the removed nature of a guy like Thohir. I mean, look, he's going to be there. He's going to go to Milan. He's going to be part of their dealings. Is that really the best way for him to handle it? Lots and lots of questions, and for the answers, go check out Giuseppe La Rocca on the Trequartista podcast. Follow him, Trequartista_GL on Twitter. Giuseppe, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll be live tonight, so anybody interested in Serie A, Serie B will be covering it. Trequartista podcast.
There you go. Thanks a lot, Giuseppe, man. I'll talk to you soon. All right.
Take care.
So we move on now from Italy. Good stuff from Giuseppe there. Inside, as usual, lots of fascinating storylines. You don't have to necessarily dig the soccer, and come on, it's sort of some of the best in the world, whether you think it's, whatever. People look down their noses at Serie A, right? When we started this show, 9 months ago, whatever that was. I think I remember asking the questions, your top 5 foreign leagues. Give me your top 5 foreign leagues. Italy usually either left out or bottom of the list. People don't like Serie A for whatever reason. But there are storied clubs there. And lots of things to talk about Balotelli and Inter, obviously. Milan, where they are sitting 9th in the table. Juve's dominance. Yes, we know about the scandals, and hopefully Italy can avoid those for a little while. If we get a good 10, 12 months between match fixing scandals in Italy, that's a good run. That's a good run. But the soccer is still good. Moving on from that, I have a question. I wrote this down in my rundown just like this. Should the United States cancel their friendly with Ukraine? And I'm interested to know from U.S. national team fans, U.S. men's national team fans, what your feelings are on the Ukrainian friendly right now. Most recent news out of Ukraine, and I am far from the most informed person news-wise, unless it's soccer, is that the president of Ukraine has resigned, and the parliament has scrapped anti-protest laws in response to the crisis there, in response to all of the protests and the violent nature of those protests. Does that, look, it is January 28th. The match is set for March 3rd. Is that enough time? Do you believe that the United States has a response, that U.S. soccer has a responsibility to get out of that friendly based on all of the things that have happened there? Should they be questioning it now? You don't have to. I guess you don't have to make that decision at this moment. You don't have to do that right this second. You can allow for some time. But that's a very interesting environment to go into if you're the United States. And I don't even know if it's necessarily about safety and security. If it is, and maybe you could make the argument, look, football heals wounds and brings people together. Maybe Ukraine needs games. Maybe they need these games with the Ukrainian national team to help them through this difficult time. But then again, the president didn't resign. The prime minister resigned. Different governments. Ukrainian president Viktor Yanukovych accepted the resignation of Prime Minister Mykola Azarov and his government on Tuesday amid a political crisis fired by violent protests on the city. Maybe you're not aware of this. I don't know how you wouldn't be aware of this, but Kiev's crazy right now. So let me know what you think about that. From a purely selfish point of view, the United States needs every game possible to get ready for the World Cup this summer. If playing Ukraine helps them get ready for the World Cup, prefer them play Ukraine. But this is a very difficult situation. Very, very difficult situation. All right, moving along. We've got Kyle McCarthy, the top of the hour, just over 10 minutes away. Don't forget about that. We'll talk to Kyle about happenings in New England, wider MLS questions. Is the East, people are asking me, has the East overtaken the West at this point? Based on all of the moves and all of the improvement that these teams have made. Look, DC United is going to be improved. I think it's impossible for them not to. We know what Philadelphia just did, and they've got their eye on a midfielder out of Sochaux as well, and I can't pronounce his name, and I'm not going to try right now. New England is strong. They've re-signed Lee Wen. They can get Jose Gonçalves to be happy, and we'll talk to Kyle about that, and maybe they're a contender. They certainly showed promise last year. We know what's going on. Look, New York is going to be powerful. We'll see exactly what their roster looks like when they start their season. But they've got Thierry Henry. They've got Tim Cahill. They've got Dax McCarty. They still have the ability to compete in the East. They come off a supporter shield. Of course they do. Toronto, of course, stealing all the headlines, making those big money moves. Is Montreal going to get better or worse under Frank Lopez? How good is Columbus going to be under Greg Berhalter? How good is Chicago going to be under Frank Yallop? Is the East top to bottom a little bit closer together than the West? And that doesn't necessarily mean the best teams are in the East. It may just mean that the East is more competitive top to bottom. Mike McGrew on Twitter, Cincy Sporting on Twitter. The cynic in me says playing in social unrest is good prep for Brazil. That is hardcore cynicism, Mike. I don't know that you can let's go and play Ukraine because there's going to be social unrest in Brazil, and they'll get it. No, come on. It's a terrible reason to play that game. Terrible, terrible reason. It's a difficult choice. All right. A couple of interesting notes on the American soccer stadium front. First of all, Miami-Dade officials meeting with David Beckham's people, negotiating a plan to get a stadium built for his potential MLS team. There are several. I think there's like 30 sites that they're talking about. They may have identified a couple. I read a story about this that was local, very specific locally. And I don't know the geography of the area, so it's difficult for me to speak about what spot would be better than what. But it does indicate, if these negotiations are happening, that Beckham and his team are getting closer. And we know that the Commissioner Garber has indicated, or did at the draft, that an announcement on Miami may come as early as next month. So you're looking at Miami. We all agree that is a foregone conclusion, a fait accompli, that Miami's going to get back in MLS, that David Beckham's going to be at the head of it, that Mauricio Clore is going to be the money behind it. Whether or not it's going to be successful is an open question. But it's going to be very difficult for MLS to turn down David Beckham. And don't know yet if he's going to get his cut rate price on the franchise. But they're not going to say no. He's in, and Miami's in. So there's your 22, right? There's 22. 23, by all indications, is going to be Atlanta. MLS has decided after years and years and years, and I have heard the complaints over and over again, after years and years of not being in that southeastern corner of the United States, they are suddenly going to drop 3 teams in rapid succession into that region. Now, you can argue with me whether Miami is in the south. It's in the southeast, geographically speaking. Orlando, and now we've got Atlanta. Again, based on what I know, based on what I've heard, this is happening. It's happening at the Atlanta Falcons Stadium. This is going to be a version of the Vancouver Whitecaps situation. And the announcement may come soon. I don't have a date, but soon. We'll see. But Arthur Blank has pulled his money card out and will be buying into MLS. What does that mean for the future of MLS? And now that we have, and this is going to be the debate that's going to rage, at least until these teams get on the field and put people in the stands. And I'm going to get tired of it, but I suppose it's one we got to have. The discussion is going to be, Miami's not a good sports town. Atlanta's not a good sports town. Why is MLS going to these cities? And again, all you got to do is look at a map. All you have to do is look at a map, realize that for the first 18, 19, 20 years of its existence, outside of the mutiny fusion years, that MLS has failed in the Southeast, but that the Southeast represents the biggest potential for growth. You went to the Northwest, you leveraged the hell out of that. Seattle and Vancouver and Portland are all successes. Fantastic. Fantastic. Now you've got a potential here in the southeast corner of the U.S., which is heavily populated. Lots of people play soccer. Let's not stereotype. College football may be number one. Football, period, may be the biggest sport, but that's true everywhere else, too. There are people that play soccer. There are certainly soccer fans, growing immigrant communities, growing Hispanic communities, even if they're not immigrant. There's plenty of potential there. And that's why that's why MLS is going to go to the Southeast. That's why they're going to go to Miami and Atlanta in rapid succession. And we've obviously got New York City coming in, New York City FC coming in as well. So we're going to have that debate. And it's going to take Miami and Atlanta filling up their stadiums, whatever their capacities are, to get people off their back for the time being. For the time being. And look, it's up to the soccer communities in those two towns. Because it's not, look, the casual fan is only going to come out if you give him a reason to. The guy that flips by the Marlins and the Heat, maybe not the Marlins, but definitely the Heat, goes to a couple of Dolphin games a year, likes soccer, doesn't have anything against soccer. You're going to get him out. You better fill the stadium up. Better make that team decent enough to compete. Put a couple big names on the field. Make it a first-class presentation. More than anything else, in both of those spots, Atlanta, Miami, first-class presentation. It has to be that way. Probably more Miami than Atlanta, but both of them. You have to show the fan bases in those two towns that this is a serious proposition, that these teams are going to be competitive. David Beckham helps. The star power in Miami helps. They sign up LeBron James. That helps. They get Pitbull to play, which is the other thing this article mentioned. They get Pitbull to play in the stadium. He's open to playing in the stadium in Miami once they get it built. Fantastic. Build it now. Pitbull's going to play. The guy from the World Cup song is going to play there. Clearly, that's a reason to build a stadium. Clearly. It's going to be fascinating to watch. This opens up the conversation for number 24. And I know people have sort of been accepting Miami as a fait accompli, as I mentioned. And I think Atlanta has been on the tip of most people's tongues. And I'm not the first person to say Atlanta's going to get an MLS team. Brian Strauss has been reporting this for some time now. But now we get to number 24. And on that front, Don Garber's going to San Antonio to meet with the mayor and the owner of the San Antonio Scorpions. They've got a friendly coming up. That friendly Mexico and Korea. When is that? Is that today or is that tomorrow? I'm going to check on the schedule for that. But he's going to meet with the mayor of San Antonio. He's going to meet with the owner of the San Antonio Scorpions, and they're going to take the temperature of San Diego as an MLS market. MLS flirted with San Antonio once. And maybe coming back around. And it's thanks to the Scorpions, who've done an amazing thing there. They built a purpose-built stadium. They've got a good thing going. They got a great TV deal for an NASL team. There's potential there, obviously. It doesn't take a genius to know that there's soccer potential in San Antonio. If they could find the right situation, then it's worth it. This is from Dan McCarthy at expressnews.com. Don Garber will travel to San Antonio on Tuesday, where he'll meet with Mayor Julian Castro and Scorpions owner Gordon Hartman to discuss the city's prospects of earning an expansion bid in advance of Wednesday's exhibition between Mexico and South Korea. He's certainly aware of the growing popularity of the sport in San Antonio, and he's excited to learn more during his visit, said Dan Cordemonch. Clearly, the Scorpions have been a tremendous success at the lower divisions, as illustrated by their strong support. It's something all of us in the American soccer community have noticed. Now, the league has said they want to go for 24 teams by 2020. Last time I checked, it's 2014. We could be done with this thing by next year. We could be, at least in terms of naming the sites, we could be done with this by next year. If they want to get to 24, if they don't go beyond that, that means there's one spot left. And while San Antonio may seem to have an inside track, I certainly think that Charlotte's a dark horse. I don't know that there are any other towns that measure up to either one of them. San Antonio, Charlotte, way down the list, St. Louis, way down the list, Sacramento. Sacramento probably ahead of St. Louis, just because they have a team. It's going to be a battle royale for that last spot. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, our friend Kyle McCarthy from Fox Soccer will join us. We'll talk to him about the New England Revolution, who he covers for the Boston Herald, or he did. We'll check on see if he's still doing that. It's Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Stay right there.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Jason Davis back on Soccer Morning. I like dropping new music on Trevor. He has no idea it's coming. Flip him out. Kyle McCarthy's on the line with me from Fox Soccer and the Boston Herald, where he covers the New England Revolution. Kyle, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm okay. It's an interesting time to be paying attention to MLS, and I know you cover Liga MX as well for Fox Soccer, and it's fascinating stuff happening down there as they play games. We're still waiting for MLS to get ready for the new season. But in the meantime, all of this player movement and players throwing hissy fits and disagreements with front offices and sort of the recombination of these rosters heading into the new year is fascinating. I'm going to start with you with the New England Revolution. Today, the news is good news. Signed Lee Wen to a multi-year extension. That's fabulous. He has been a major contributor to their success the last couple of seasons. On the flip side of that, where does the Jose Gonçalves situation stand? Because last I heard, he wasn't too happy with the front office.
He's still not very happy with his contract at the moment. It's a complex situation. It all stems from the fact that he joined the Reds on loan from FC Sion last year, and that led to a situation where MLS contributed to his wages and FC Sion contributed to his wages. They flipped the switch, made the deal permanent, and all of a sudden his wages went down a little bit. So it's a tricky situation for sure, and one that I'm closely monitoring, and a lot of people in New England are watching carefully.
You know, I said this on my other show. I said that New England has to be careful not to Camillo the situation. Now, there are other factors, as you mentioned. The change of loan to a permanent deal clearly moves the onus of his salary into different areas. But he is the defender. He's the reigning defender of the year. This is a guy who's crucial to what they're doing and was, an absolute warrior for them last season. Even if financially it doesn't make sense and something has to happen and he leaves the club, that's terrible from a public perception standpoint, is it not?
It is, especially when you look at what he was able to contribute for that team last year. He played every minute of every MLS game, and he was exactly what they needed in central defense. So when you look at this situation, you can understand why the Reds have been willing to reassess the situation and discuss the contract with him. They exercised an option for 2014. League sources have told me that he's expected to be paid in the region of $450,000, which is a lot of money for a defender in MLS.
Mm-hmm.
But that figure doesn't meet what he was taking home last year from several sources. So I think both parties are interested in finding a solution. It's just a matter of getting to a number that's going to work for everybody involved.
Is this something that, this may be more high profile because of the season he had last year, but is this something that regularly happens to MLS clubs when they have a strong performer that's on loan and then, look, it makes sense to make it a permanent deal that may have been written into the contract when he was on loan. We know that most MLS loan deals, incoming loans, they have an option to buy at the end of them. But is this something that regularly happens, and is there a way for MLS to combat this situation happening again?
I'm not sure on that one. I think it's the sort of thing that tends to happen because when you look at how the loan market works elsewhere, it's a little bit different than in MLS because you've got the unilateral options, and those figures tend to be a little bit more set. In the rest of the world, everything tends to be a little bit more flexible in terms of compensation and figuring out, well, he had a good year last year. Let's rip up the contract and give him a little bit more. It's a little bit harder in MLS. MLS does do that, particularly if players succeed at the top end. It's just not as automatic as it is in other places. So it's something to monitor for sure because MLS does not want a reputation of playing hardball with guys who come into the league and succeed.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Revs had a pretty strong year in 2013, made the playoffs, played some very good soccer, kind of became the darling of the league on some level, at least in the Eastern Conference, because of how exciting they were from an attacking standpoint. They figure to compete again in 2014. I mean, obviously Gonçalves hanging over their head. They got Lee Nguyen back and Charlie Davies in the mix. Are they going to be able to compete in what seems to be a very, very quickly improving Eastern Conference?
They'll be able to compete, but in order to move forward, they're going to need another striker to really bolster the ranks. Losing Juan Agudelo was a big blow for them. Obviously, they knew he was going to leave for Europe at the end of the season, but his presence brought a lot of things together for that team, and there's no real direct replacement for him in the squad right now. So I think for the Revs, they're going to need to go out and get somebody to really increase the odds in the final third for them to take the step forward that they're expecting to take this year.
And as you look at the Eastern Conference from your perspective, I mean, it's obvious to point to Toronto and say, look, they dropped $100 million on a couple of players. They've brought in some of the other pieces like Justin Morrow and have gotten better just from a squad perspective. But from where you sit, who has improved the most and who is most likely to make a major leap forward in 2014?
Toronto's the obvious answer. I think when you look at what they've done both at the top end of the squad with Michael Bradley and Jermaine Defoe and Gilberto, and what they've done in the middle, bringing in some guys with proven MLS experience, Justin Morrow, Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
The squad as a whole has improved substantially. I think Philadelphia may also fall into that category with the work that they've been able to do in midfield to strengthen with Maurice Adu finally coming on board, with Maidana signing with them to occupy the left-hand side, and with the negotiations with Vincent Nogueira. So when you look at teams, you're trying to see if they can address their present concerns and then improve upon them in a substantial way.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at what Toronto and Philadelphia have done so far in the offseason, I think they fall into that category.
One of the questions for both of those clubs is at the top. They're the guy on the sidelines, the leadership of John Hackworth and Ryan Nelson. It's especially come up in Toronto because Nelson was the one holdover from the Payne era, and now he's being handed all of this talent, and he has yet to really prove himself on that level. Now, John Hackworth, his resume is much deeper. We know that. But do you have any real questions about whether either one of those guys can navigate an MLS season and get the most out of what they've got?
Both guys will enter the season with squads that are sort of suited to their strengths. Nelson retains his job, at least from my perspective, because he's able to communicate with top-end players. When you look at how Toronto was recruited, they wanted to increase the quality within the squad. And Nelson can relate to those players because he's been at the top level. Does he have the coaching experience? No. But at least Toronto has put him in a position where he might be able to succeed if he's able to pull everything together. Hackworth is sort of in a similar spot because he's got a young squad that really fits in with how he prefers to develop players. And now that he has a little bit more experience and a little bit more in terms of strength in midfield, it should contribute to how that team is going to function. So I think for both guys, there are questions, obviously, but they are putting themselves in a position where they're able to answer them and succeed with their sides.
I mean, look, they weren't destitute attacking wise last year, but who scores the goals for Philadelphia? I mean, we saw some inconsistency out of McInerney. Connor Casey is getting up there. Where do the goals come from?
They have to come from both places, and they have to come from midfield. Connor Casey is going to need support because he's not going to play 34 games.
Right.
He's just not a guy who's built to play every week. So Jack McInerney is going to have to find his form. Philadelphia is going to have to get contributions from midfield. Sebastian Letou is going to have to contribute in the final third. There are questions there. There are also questions at the back after Jeff Park left at DC United. Mm-hmm. So it's not like everything is rosy in Philadelphia, but when you look at what they've been able to do during the winter, it looks like they've improved substantially in their biggest area of need, which was in midfield.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how Hackworth. I mean, Maurice Adu, you pay him that much money, you would imagine that he's going to be your starter in midfield. They have a Mobi Okugo, who is a solid central defender, but whose best position may be in defensive midfield. Let me ask you about the Maurice Edu deal. We had rumors, and the stories were that the league initially rejected a potential salary of $1.4 million for Maurice Edu. Lots of questions of whether or not he's worth that, and sort of a wrench thrown in that discussion via the recent rash of spending, particularly in Toronto. Now we have Maurice Edu on a loan deal from Stoke, and he probably won't be making that much money. But from your perspective, number one, has the salary the salary window for players like Maurice Edu and that has it moved significantly based on the recent activity, and is MLS changing the allocation rule on the DP level? Where do you fall on that?
The situation has changed for players like Maurice Edu. If MLS comes to Maurice Edu and says, look, we'd like to bring you in, and then he looks at Michael Bradley making in the region of $6 million, he has to keep a harder line in terms of what he's getting paid. And that's going to happen time and time again, because $6 million or thereabouts is a lot of money. And some of these players are used to taking discounts to return to MLS. Look at Michael Parkhurst, who inevitably took a wage cut when he moved from Augsburg to Columbus. And there are situations like that over and over and over again. So it does change the landscape. But MLS, by playing a little bit hardball, by making sure that the number to hit was more appropriate for Edu in an MLS sort of landscape, it sort of sent out a signal that said, look, Michael Bradley's a special case. We understand your point, but we're going to try and keep our structure within its usual sort of confines. Right. I think that's something to monitor as we move into the summer, especially after the World Cup, where the league's going to be searching for big name additions. Yeah.
Well, I threw on a second question. Let me sort of restate that by saying you mentioned the league is sending a message. Michael Bradley is a special player. Clearly, Michael Bradley, Clint Dempsey, returning U.S. internationals, did not go through the allocation process, while Philadelphia was forced to trade up to the number one spot in order to ensure that they got Maurice Edu, who's coming back to MLS as a U.S. international. They issued a statement yesterday. It doesn't seem to add any clarification to this. Do you have any issue with the way that this has been handled, or do we just sort of have to sit back and take it because the rules are always going to be changing?
The rules in the MLS are always flexible to meet the needs of the league. And I think that's a fundamental concept that has been in place since this league started. And it can be frustrating. It can be infuriating because there's no expectancy in terms of how a particular decision will come down. Usually there's some rationale afterward. But in this case, I think when you saw Philadelphia go out and get the number one slot in the allocation order, I think that was always how this was going to unfold. The question is whether this is a permanent shift, or it's the sort of shift that looks permanent for now and we'll move in another direction. But for the moment, it seems like players who are DPs are subject to the allocation order until they're not, and that's sort of how it's working at the moment. And you know there are pros and cons to that sort of construction, but for the moment that is what it is.
Kyle McCarthy covers soccer period for Fox Soccer these days. Also writes on the Revs at the Boston Herald. Follow him on Twitter, Kyle J. McCarthy. Kyle, appreciate it as always. Fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Talk to you soon. There goes Kyle McCarthy talking a little Revs, a little MLS Eastern Conference. We didn't really get to the West. I kind of wanted to keep it a little bit of a narrow focus. So much of the movement, so much of the changes have happened in the Eastern Conference and ahead of 2014 that I think that's where the talking points are. I don't know that we can get into a debate of East versus West right now, but here's something very interesting. Shared at Pro Soccer Talk, and I saw these. I'm sure I was emailed these. I always get emailed the odds for whatever reason. Bovada, which I think is the successor to Bodog, which got shut down for whatever reason, moved offshore. Now they're Bovada. Anyway, we have MLS Cup odds for 2014. Now, remember, this is MLS Cup. This is going through the season, making the playoffs, winning the title. These are your odds for MLS teams. Let's start. Your favorite, the LA Galaxy at 9-2. Sporting Kansas City, defending champion, 5-1. New York Red Bulls, defending Supporter Shield winner, 11-2. Portland, 7-1. Seattle, 9-1. Real Salt Lake, 11-1. Houston, 12-1. Toronto, by virtue of their spending spree, jumps into the top, top 9, top 10, 14-1. San Jose, 16-1. New England, 20-1. Chicago, 25-1. FC Dallas, 25-1. Montreal, 25-1. Columbus, Vancouver, Colorado, DC United, Philadelphia Union, and Chivas USA bring up the rear. Philadelphia at 50-1. We just got done talking about Kyle McCarthy threw some praise in the direction of the Union and talked about how much better they're going to be or should be in 2014. And then there they are. It's 50-1 shots to win MLS Cup. Now, when it comes to gambling, and if you do so, do it responsibly. I'm not a gambler myself, but hey, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money. If you do decide to place a bet on MLS, remember on MLS Cup, remember that these odds are set to drive action on both sides of the bet. Not necessarily because these are the teams most likely to win. The LA Galaxy at 9-2. Are we really sure? Are we really sure? If they get Rio Ferdinand, I mean, they're a lock, right? But the LA Galaxy as the overall favorite at 9-2. That's a little surprising to me. That's got to be on rep. And here's the issue. Here's the thing that these odds tell me about the maturity of betting on MLS, which probably isn't a big industry to begin with. There's probably not a ton of people betting on MLS. But what these odds tell me is that people are still betting by reputation, by name recognition, not necessarily based on what they know about the team's strengths coming into the new year. Look, the LA Galaxy are the biggest name in MLS in terms of club recognition. There's no arguing that. So if they are relatively good, and they're going to have Donovan and Keane, and they'll still have Gonzalez, at least for the first part of the year, and they'll still have Juninho, they'll still have some of this talent in there. They are going to be the favorites because they're going to drive the bets at that level. Sporting Kansas City, defending champion, some name recognition. There you go. New York Red Bulls, obviously, won the points title last year for whatever that was worth, and head into the new year as a relatively fancied pick. Down at the bottom, nobody's going to argue with Chivas USA at 66-1. The Philadelphia Union at 50-1. If you know something about MLS, they might that bet might be worth a punt, as the British would say, because there's some value there. They could make a surprise run to the playoffs. The Colorado Rapids won an MLS Cup, guys. Now maybe things have changed a little bit, and if they adjust the playoff structure and give more advantage to the higher seed, then maybe that makes it more difficult for a fifth seed to make it. But it's possible. DC United 50-1. And I didn't get a chance to ask Kyle about his thoughts on DC United. But they're going to improve. Improve enough to make the playoffs and make an MLS Cup run? Probably not. They have some questions. They have some holes. Colorado 50-1. There's some value there, right? Depending on who they hire as their head coach, and maybe that's part of what's driving their odds down. Although, again, we're not talking about people who are always people who betting that are betting are not always the most knowledgeable. They need to hire a coach. Colorado needs to hire. Where's your coach? Who's your coach? If it's Pablo Mastroianni, give him the job and let him get started. I know he's acting that way right now. Just hand the keys to him so he can actually get started. Colorado at 50-1. Decent bet there. Vancouver at 33-1. Next longest odds. They got talent. They've got a new coach. First year, Carl Robinson. He's got to learn on the job, but they've got talent. Even without Camilo. They have the ability to surprise some people in the Western Conference. And again, you could argue that most of the Western Conference has taken if not a step back, they haven't moved forward. Have the LA Galaxy moved forward? I don't think so. Have the Seattle Sounders moved forward? They had a bad run which torpedoed their season. But nobody argues that they don't have the talent to get the job done. Which is why they're a 9-1 bet right here. So the rest of the Western Conference stood still. I don't know. Conjugating verbs. It's a problem. All right, the phone lines are open. 347-756-6276. If you want to give me a call in the last couple minutes of today's Tuesday edition of the show. Looking ahead again, got Premier League games today. I'm looking at Puma signing their deal with Arsenal, 150 million pounds or dollars. 150 million pounds, $248 million for Arsenal from Puma. That's Puma making a statement of intent. 310, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason, this is David from LA.
What's up, man?
I want to get your opinion on the wave of young Americans trying to go to Europe, and seems like the mid-20s, late-20s Americans come back to MLS. I just want to see what's your opinion on that.
Well, it depends. I mean, look, every player. I try not to paint with a broad brush because every player's got his own decisions to make. Every player finds himself in a different situation. Junior Flores gets the opportunity to go to Dortmund. How do you turn that down? If Haji Wright, the Galaxy Academy forward, gets a chance to go to Germany, it's going to be tough to turn it down. When we talk about these guys that are sort of getting name recognition at 17, 18, 19 years old and have the opportunity to go abroad and train with a famous club, whether it's Dortmund or even West Ham. I mean, Sebastian Lech gets there, and maybe he breaks through, or maybe he ends up coming back to the States and playing in MLS. I don't know. Each one of these guys has a different individual situation. I think, as a rule, what we want as a soccer country is for those guys to see MLS as a viable choice to start, play a couple of years, get some playing time, then go to Europe. And MLS would benefit from that based on transfer fees and the like. I don't know. Right. Eric Palmer Brown's another guy come up recently, the Sporting Kansas City defender, who may be headed to Juventus in 2 years when he turns 18. I don't know. I think MLS needs to do a better job of finding a way to bridge the gap. I mean, we've been talking about that for a long time now. Right.
I just think that it seems that before we thought MLS was a launching pad to go to Europe, but now it seems like these young kids could just go straight there because we have teams scouting our young players.
There's something to that, yeah. There's certainly something to that, but then again, there's been a history of this for a while now. I mean, there have been the Joe Jows of the world went abroad when they could, as soon as they could. I mean, these opportunities have been present for a couple of years, but it's only going to get more prevalent. You're right. The idea that kids, first of all, Europe will always be the dream, or it will be for a very long time. And I'm not even sure it's worth fighting that. It's just do your own take care of your own business, make your league better, give these kids an opportunity to get playing time between the ages of 18 and 21 or 22 when they're really going to be full professionals. So just take care of your business. But Europe's going to remain the dream for most of these guys. And I don't blame them for that. And I'm not going to criticize the decision of a player who has an opportunity to go to Dortmund. Now, I will question a guy who comes out of college, leaves college early, or maybe he's a high school player, and immediately believes that Scandinavia is better. Like that's a different question. If we're talking about going and joining the Dortmund Academy at 17 or 18, whenever you're allowed to, fine. And playing in the second division in Germany, that's different than I'm going to go and play at Rosenborg or where. I mean, nothing against those leagues, but it just doesn't seem to be a much better option than MLS, except for monetarily. And there's that question there too.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, man. Appreciate the call. Got a couple more minutes. 347-756-6276. Okay, I have 3 minutes. If you want to get in the next 3 minutes, you can do so. So anyway, Arsenal signing this deal with Puma. That's life-changing money, even for a club like Arsenal. $250 million dollars going into their coffers via Puma. They leave Nike behind and move to Puma. Ivan Gazidis is one of the men behind the deal, former deputy commissioner of MLS, a guy who has helped lead Arsenal back, to where people thought they should be. Now, competing for a title is not the same thing as winning a title, and they need to win a trophy in order for anybody to say, well, they really are back. But they spent some money this summer. That was a shock. just because they hadn't been doing that for a while. And now they signed this deal with Puma, and you kind of understand what exactly is going on behind the scenes at Arsenal as they improve on their business. Now, somebody mentioned on Twitter, I think it was Abram. Yeah. Abram Chamberlain mentioned on Twitter, India 11's soccer-specific stadium plan would say otherwise. I believe that was in response to my notion that San Antonio and Charlotte are your leading contenders for the 24th team in MLS. That's my gut. I have nothing to base that on other than my gut. In terms of the market size, in terms of where those cities rank and where they sit and the sort of, not to break it down to demographics necessarily, but that's a major factor here. Nothing against Sacramento, city of my birth. Don't think it measures up. And Indianapolis is kind of in that same boat. I know they've got an NFL team. I know they've got an NBA basketball team. But if you go and look, Indianapolis is not a particularly big market. And I don't know that should always dictate what MLS does. Clearly, they've gone to Orlando. They've gone to Portland. Those are not big markets either, or at least not overwhelmingly large markets. But there is got to be some kind of wisdom to choices that goes, I guess, if you're making the decision, right? It's, do you have a good stadium plan? Do you have an owner with cash? What are the other deciding factors? All right, let's squeak in one more phone call before I got to go. 250, you're on the air.
Hey, it's Justin from BC. Well, producer Justin, I guess.
Oh, awesome.
Maybe.
What's up, producer Justin? Quickly.
Well, I'm a big Everton supporter, and it being Derby Day here, and just getting all revved up for the game. I want to know what your favorite derby is in the entire world of soccer.
It's a very good question. I'm not a fan of either team by any stretch, but I like the North London Derby. I find that one kind of entertaining from an outside observer's perspective. Everton and Liverpool are up there too. I like that one. Recent years, the Manchester Derby has become fascinating based on the money versus the history. I don't know. I mean, look, the Old Firm is interesting when they actually get to play each other again. I don't know. At least in terms of the league. I don't know that I have a favorite. I like rivalry in general. Look, Seattle and Portland, at least domestically, is fantastic. Just because of the images that game produces, whether it's in Seattle or Portland. It's fantastic stuff. So I don't have a favorite. I'm sitting on the fence. I love rivalry, period. Best of luck to Everton today. I got to get going, man. Appreciate the call.
Thank you. Come on, you Blues.
There you go. Come on, you Blues. Getting that in at the death here. All right, tomorrow we're back on the air, 10 o'clock Eastern, as you know. Please go follow us on Twitter, Soccer Morning. Go to iTunes, ratings and reviews. And I think that's it. I think we're done for today. We've exhausted all talking points. We have covered all ground. And now we will make way, and you can head into the rest of your Tuesday fulfilled with soccer. Just filled up with soccer. All right, we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.
Days on the boulevard I landed. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was I, the abstract, and me, the 5 foot.